When I finished Final Fantasy XIII 2, I had no idea what to expect for Lightning Returns. The world had been swallowed by darkness, Sarah was dead, and Lightning cried herself into Crystal Jail in grief over having not been there to keep the Academy from extracting Vanille from her pillar prison made of crystal, and kept Sarah's soul from being loosed in a world exposed to Vanille once again. Everyone, even people who didn't like the first two games, told me that this was it. This was the good game. And here I was about to start it, and it didn't take long to see why it was so highly regarded. This game is literally Shadowbringers. And this time there's absolutely no time travel excuse, because we know that Lightning wished herself over to Eorzea while she was dreaming in Crystal to steal all of 14's good ideas. This game takes place in Norvrant. Sorry, Nova Chrysalia, where 9/10 of the world has been swallowed by darkness. You periodically turn to your guide, who spends all his time in an observatory watching your every move like he's trying to be Sting reborn, until you find out that they were hatching an ill-conceived plot to kill themselves in order to save the world. In Final Fantasy XIV, this doesn't work, as the Catman gets mercifully gunned down in the street by a passing Good Samaritan who saves his life by shooting him.
Thank you.
Then, all his friends get mad at him for saving his life.
You bastard!
In Final Fantasy XIII, Hope succeeds in getting flicked out of existence by some giant, blind, benevolent, idiot god, sleeping happily until one day someone murders his idiot daughter and destroys 90% of everything he ever built. It actually wasn't Hope's fault, but he was the one humanity looked to for leadership and guidance, and dare I say hope. So naturally, God sees this paragon of humanity and rewards him the only way that makes sense. 170 years of non-stop mental, physical, and emotional torture. Bravo, Hope. You didn't earn that at all. Anyway, the Crystal Exarch only had 100 years of loitering around in his Crystal Palace, which the Ascians just didn't notice appeared out of nowhere for a century. I guess having to eat recycled matter for a few years while the town sprang up around him and revered him as some kind of messianic figure until Emperor Solus discovers his critical weakness to projectile weaponry might count as torture. It's clear that after playing Lightning Returns, it's very much an experience where everything either thematically ties into an element of the story or does so directly. The visuals and sound design all tell their own stories in addition to the main tale being told. A tale which, I might add, is not centered around Lightning. While she may be the titular character, she's designed to be an outsider to this strange new world, much like the player. She takes the role of the perspective character occupying the final days, before the end of the world. Unlike Norvrant, this world is truly beyond saving, and the only solution is to steal the soul of everyone you meet and force them into a new world which God is dreaming up. Once the player realizes that Lightning is just the player perspective insert with a stated goal of finding her sister, it begins to dawn on the player that Hope is actually the one the majority of the story is about. After all, in the past 1,000 years in the universe, Lightning's only been around for about 3 months. A pretty outsized impact considering how much Hope did the entire time she was off playing in Valhalla and sleeping in Crystal. Spoiler, while she's doing that, Hope builds a future city with flying cars, builds his own version of God, and then builds a planet which then hovers in the sky and becomes leader of all mankind. But, he didn't do much. But we know what happens in the 14 universe when that much faith and belief is pumped into a single person. They get chopped up and scattered around what's left of the world and turned into a primal from another game. While the rules of the universe in 13 are fairly consistent and flushed out, it becomes apparent that while the fringes of much of it, such as the symbolism, vocabulary, and imagery present in the game, are all representative things that are established in the mythos, Much of the time, that mythos is either never fully explained or given in tiny pieces across seemingly disparate quests. For example, hope is established to have vanished 170 years ago. We know that someone's memories of someone fade away when their souls are destroyed. Souls cease to exist when they're forgotten, and hope was in God, but also within his body in the Ark, and Daj's soul was sundered into 5 pieces. Therefore, you can extrapolate that Hope's soul was sundered and ripped in 2, diluting people's memories and attachment to him. This occurred after decades of constant physical and mental torture as God remolded his body to be able to house a god. It's stuff like this that drive people nuts. What's worse, not all the events that are referenced make it into the game, such as the Rose Phantom incident related to the quest involving the flower of the same name. No, that's only in the follow-up novella, something of which there's an annoyingly large amount of in the 13th trilogy as a whole. While these incidents and events are obliquely referenced in the game, they're never directly addressed. This leads me to believe that parts of the game that were scrapped or cut out mid-production were later included into the novels. While this is fine, as the core story can be understood without them, the fact that the creators felt that the novellas needed to address or confirm misconceptions using all the subtlety of a sledgehammer indicates to me that the game released and remains in a semi-incomplete state. Plus, I can't overemphasize how much I absolutely despise multimedia format storytelling, where you have to watch the movie to play the game so you can read the comic that leads into the book so you can understand what's going on in the first 5 minutes of the second movie. I don't have time for that, and if you make me work that hard for something, I'm honestly just not going to care enough to keep up. The 13th trilogy is nowhere near as egregious though. I'm looking at you, Warcraft. While the novellas do add to the world of 13 and help the characterization, I wouldn't call them required reading. Although I would still consider them to be more required reading than Final Fantasy XIV's Chronicles of Light, as those almost exclusively exist to expand on peripheral or side characters that the game either doesn't have the time to develop or there isn't a good way to include it within the narrative. Nevertheless, these stories exist and affect the world to some extent, so while they aren't required, I still enjoy reading them. Especially the ones that embarrass Lightning a bit and poke at her too cool for school facade. It's a bit like when Estinian gets made fun of. He's awesome, we love him, but that's why we enjoy having fun at his expense. It was also during this game that it finally hit me that the 13th trilogy as a whole was extremely rooted in Norse mythology. Different Final Fantasy games tend to have things they draw from. 14 in particular has a plethora of cultures and mythologies including Greek, Indian, Native American, and Middle Eastern. But in 13, it took me far longer than I'd like to admit to realize that the game follows the Norse myth of Ragnarok fairly closely, even calling the event by name in the original Final Fantasy XIII. In Lightning Returns, we feed Yggdrasil, the World Tree, the souls of people who trusted us enough to help them, so we could steal their souls and feed them to the tree so we can extend the amount of time the universe has before it implodes. Feed me! That was humanity's fault too, since they decided to go around killing gods all willy-nilly. But anyway, the World Tree isn't the tree for the current world, but the one being dreamed up by Boom Bunny Banjo-Kazooie, who is really just napping this whole time. While he's napping, Lightning decides that she's going to kill him for some reason. Anyway, we find Vanille, and she is at long last rehabilitated and renounced her evil ways. That is until we find out that she's planning to murder the entirety of humanity's souls not currently inhabiting a body. She almost had me convinced for a while there, but my faith in her being the literal worst carried me through yet another day. That sounds awful, but it's made worse by the fact that nobody's been born in 500 years, and people dying of old age just isn't a thing anymore. It's a bit like how the Void works in 14, and how everyone is immortal. But in 14's Void, when they die, they just reconstitute. In 13, when you die, you go to Vanille, and she permakills your soul. It's a bit more like what Medion did in 14 during the final days, which to me is pretty much the worst thing you can do. But it's good to know that there are some things that never change. It brings consistency to my life. Before I finish this though, I want to go back to my comparison to Shadowbringers. While Lightning Returns is a game about a world swallowed by darkness, the final battle is against a god of light and creation, very similar to how Shadowbringers is a game about a world swallowed by light, and the final battle against a god, or in this case an ancient, of darkness, whose power seems to be godlike, who can create an entire metropolis with mind magic and string. The similarities are striking. Shadowbringers may have hit me harder, but the original is usually better like that.